Bob Dylan has never been a man of lists. He resists categories, dodges labels, and shrugs at the idea of being pinned down. For decades, interviewers chased him with questions about heroes, influences, favorites, and for decades, Dylan danced around them, partly out of mischief, partly out of instinct, partly out of a stubborn need to keep mystery alive.
Okay, you hear and see it, and it's going to happen fast, and you're not going to get it all, and you might even hear the wrong words.
Because Dylan's world has never been about idols. It has been about songs, the kind that stay after the noise fades. Yet in rare moments, between riddles, between silences, Dylan did name names. Bands that cut through his defenses, bands that, in their rhythm or rebellion, spoke a language he recognized. These were not casual mentions. They were Dylan's nods of respect, fragments of a personal canon. And when he spoke them, the weight carried across generations. So, what did Dylan reveal? Which bands made it past his barbed wit and into the small circle of admiration? Here are the 6 bands Bob Dylan finally named as his favorites. Number 6, the Rolling Stones. For Dylan, the Stones were not just survivors of the 1960s. They were the embodiment of rock's dangerous heart. He admired the swagger, the pulse, the way Jagger's sneer and Richards's riffs collided into something raw and undeniable. Dylan once quipped, "The Rolling Stones are the greatest rock and roll band in the world." The line carried irony and respect in equal measure. He saw in them a truth, a band that never pretended to be pure and therefore never lost its edge. The Stones represented something Dylan valued, endurance without apology. Where other bands cracked under the weight of fame, the Stones carried their chaos like a badge. Dylan knew what it meant to be mythologized and misunderstood, and he recognized in them a similar refusal to play safe. Their songs did not shimmer with refinement, they bled with tension. He heard that in Gimme Shelter, in Street Fighting Man, in the barbed groove of Sympathy for the Devil. These were not jukebox staples, they were dispatches from the storm. The connection was not only sound. Dylan admired how Keith Richards turned rhythm guitar into an act of rebellion, open-tuned, syncopated, almost ragged yet impossible to shake. That was Dylan's language too, imperfection as truth. He once told friends that Richards was a poet of riffs, every chord change a kind of street sermon. In later reflections, Dylan said the Stones had their own law, a code anyone could sense but few could copy. "You cannot really cover the Stones. They already said it in their own way." To him, that explained the hold they kept on stages and streets alike. What he respected most was their devotion to immediacy. Even at their most theatrical, there was dirt under their fingernails. The Stones, for all their fame, still brought danger into the room. In them, Dylan heard not just a band, but a reminder. Rock should sound like life itself, flawed, fevered, unforgettable. Number 5, the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead represented something Dylan cherished, music as community, not commodity. He toured with them in the 1980s, calling the collaboration a turning point. Their sprawling improvisations might have baffled some, but to Dylan, the Dead carried the folk lineage forward, turning every performance into a living, breathing story. He once said they were not just a band, but a way of life. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. What Dylan recognized in the Dead was a philosophy, music that dissolved the line between stage and audience. Every night was different, every song a canvas. Dylan's own catalog thrived on reinvention, and he admired how Jerry Garcia and company refused to let their songs calcify. He once remarked that they had a spirit of freedom rare in modern rock, a reminder that improvisation was more than indulgence, it was a kind of truth. Their collaboration on the Dylan and the Dead tour was controversial. Critics panned the uneven shows, but Dylan insisted the experience revitalized him. He later admitted that performing with the Dead forced him to break old habits, to rediscover his own songs as if hearing them for the first time. "They did something to my songs," he said, "and it made me do something to myself." To Dylan, the Dead embodied the idea that music was a conversation, not a recital. Garcia's solos were not performances for applause, but explorations that unfolded alongside the crowd. That intimacy, that willingness to risk failure in search of transcendence, reminded Dylan of the folk clubs where he began. In their endless touring, in their faithful yet unpredictable audiences, Dylan saw proof that music could be lived rather than consumed. He admired the way the Dead resisted stardom's polish, choosing instead to remain a traveling community bound by songs. For Dylan, that commitment mattered. The Grateful Dead were more than a band. They were a reminder that music's highest calling is connection, and connection is always alive, always unfinished. Number 4. The Clash. When punk tore into the 1970s, Dylan heard echoes of his own defiance. The Clash in particular struck him. Their rage was political, their sound urgent, their stance uncompromising. He praised them as the only band that mattered, a rare moment of unguarded admiration. To Dylan, they kept the torch of rebellion lit at a time when rock risked becoming fashion. The Clash's music carried the kind of urgency Dylan believed rock was meant to bear. Songs like London Calling or Clamp Down were not entertainment. They were dispatches from the street. Dylan had built his own legend on protest anthems that stirred conscience as much as rhythm. In The Clash, he recognized the same fusion of music and mission. What Dylan valued most was honesty. Punk thrived on imperfection, and The Clash embraced it. Their guitars were jagged, their voices raw, but the conviction was unshakable. Dylan once said the band had the ability to sing about the system without becoming part of it, a principle he held close. They weren't chasing stardom, they were demanding change. The kinship was more than ideological. Dylan admired the way Joe Strummer delivered lyrics as if every word were pulled from the gut, urgent and unavoidable. That intensity mirrored Dylan's own fire in the Greenwich Village years. Songs like The Times They Are A-Changin' had carried a similar charge, and Dylan heard that spark reignited in The Clash. Critics often asked Dylan what he thought of punk, expecting dismissal. Instead, he pointed to The Clash as proof the form had depth. Their fury was not a gimmick. It was a continuation of the folk tradition, amplified and accelerated. For Dylan, The Clash mattered because they kept risk alive. They reminded the world that music could unsettle, could challenge, could refuse compromise. In their defiance, he saw a reflection of his own, and that reflection earned his rare and lasting respect. Number 3. Creedence Clearwater Revival. Dylan respected simplicity, the kind of songs that feel eternal. Creedence Clearwater Revival, with John Fogerty at the helm, embodied that principle. Their swamp rock anthems, deceptively plain yet haunting, resonated with Dylan's own vision of Americana. Dylan once said of Fogerty, "I like Creedence Clearwater Revival. I like John Fogerty. He writes great songs." What Dylan admired most was Creedence's ability to distill the American experience into melodies that felt inevitable. Songs like Bad Moon Rising or Fortunate Son carried the punch of protest without losing their sing-along power. To Dylan, this was the highest art. Music that sounded simple, but revealed deeper truths the longer you listened. Unlike many contemporaries, Creedence did not hide behind elaborate production or psychedelic flourishes. Their sound was unvarnished, rooted in blues, country, and folk, the same currents that shaped Dylan himself. He once said, "Fogerty had the rare gift of writing songs that sounded as if they had always existed, just waiting to be sung." That gift struck Dylan as kinship. In Fogerty's work, he heard echoes of the ballads and laments he had carried from the folk tradition. Both men shared a suspicion of excess. Both believed in songs that could be carried by a single voice and guitar, even when amplified by a full band. What also resonated with Dylan was Creedence's resistance to illusion. Their songs spoke plainly about war, inequality, and disillusionment. That refusal to gloss over reality matched Dylan's instinct to confront rather than comfort. Critics often placed Fogerty in a songwriter's pantheon, but Dylan's praise sealed it. By speaking of Fogerty alongside America's most enduring voices, Dylan affirmed that Creedence had tapped the deepest roots of songcraft. For Dylan, Creedence Clearwater Revival proved that truth does not require complexity. Sometimes 3 chords and an unflinching voice are enough. Number 2. The Byrds. When the Byrds electrified Mr. Tambourine Man, they did not just cover Dylan, they reimagined him. Their jangling guitars and soaring harmonies launched folk rock into the mainstream. Dylan admitted he was astonished by what they did with his songs. They opened doors, built bridges, and in their sound, Dylan heard his own words take flight in ways he had not imagined. What struck him most was how they managed to preserve the mystery of his lyrics while making them accessible to a new audience. He once said, "They had something Byrds-like that just made sense of my songs." That transformation did not diminish his work. It expanded it, proving how durable his songwriting could be when placed in different hands. The Byrds gave Dylan more than exposure. They reshaped the cultural landscape around him. In their sound, he heard folk and rock entwine into something both ancient and modern. Their treatment of All I Really Want to Do and Chimes of Freedom showed Dylan that his catalog could breathe in electric air. He later remarked, "The Byrds, I guess they could find things in my songs that I did not even know was there." Dylan was no stranger to reinvention, but the Byrds taught him what it meant to be reinterpreted. Their crystalline 12-string guitar became synonymous with an era, yet beneath the shimmer was a grounding force, his own words refracted through their vision. By the time Dylan plugged in at Newport, the Byrds had already softened the shock. They had shown that electricity could carry poetry just as well as an acoustic guitar. For Dylan, the Byrds embodied the alchemy of music, how one song could belong to its writer and still be reborn through another's voice. They proved that influence was not ownership but renewal, and that renewal kept his work alive. Number 1. The Beatles. At the top of Dylan's list, inevitably, stood the Beatles. He met them in 1964, bringing marijuana and trading wit in a hotel room. But beyond the myth, Dylan saw in them unparalleled craft. He admired their ability to evolve, to merge pop instincts with artistic daring. Dylan once remarked, "They were doing things nobody else was doing." Their songs, like his, blurred boundaries between the personal and the universal. For Dylan, they were more than a band. They were a revolution wrapped in melody. What impressed Dylan most was their capacity to grow in public. Within a handful of years, they moved from She Loves You to A Day in the Life, a leap so audacious it redefined what pop music could be. Dylan himself was shifting from protest songs to electric surrealism at the time, and in the Beatles he saw kindred spirits, restless artists unwilling to remain fixed. He once said, "We were all influenced by the Beatles, even if we did not know it. They were always a step ahead." That acknowledgement carried weight from a man who rarely praised his contemporaries. For Dylan, their genius lay not just in innovation, but in accessibility. They made experimentation sound inviting, their melodies carrying radical ideas into living rooms across the world. Songs like Tomorrow Never Knows and Strawberry Fields Forever did not alienate. They expanded imaginations. In them, Dylan recognized a mirror. Artists who defied the industry while reshaping it, who carried poetry into pop without apology. For Dylan, the Beatles embodied the perfect balance, art as revolution, music as both weapon and balm. They were proof that a band could change the culture without losing the song. Dylan's admiration was never casual. It was not about taste or trend, but about truth. From the Rolling Stones to the Beatles, from the Grateful Dead to the Byrds, he recognized bands that carried music beyond commerce, artists who carved out their own laws, their own languages. Each of them reflected something Dylan valued: endurance, rebellion, connection, reinvention, and above all, authenticity. What his list reveals is not just his taste, but his philosophy. Music, for Dylan, was always about more than sound. It was about life lived honestly, with flaws intact and courage unmasked. These 6 bands, in their own ways, reminded him of that mission. And for us, they remain reminders too. Because when Bob Dylan named his favorites, he was not only pointing to the past, he was telling us how to listen. Which of these bands speaks to you? Share your thoughts and subscribe for more stories behind the music.